Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Amanda Fest podcast, where our mission is simple. It's to inspire and empower you to take aligned action towards your dream life, whatever that looks like for you. In 2015, our guest quit his day job to pursue his dream of becoming a full-time freelance entrepreneur. Through entrepreneurship and freelancing, he accidentally discovered that he might have been born into a cult. He grew up as a fundamentalist Mormon. His grandfather, who was one of the cult leaders, had 13 wives. He was raised by 4 moms, 1 dad, and 44 siblings, all in one house. His entrepreneurial journey allowed him to work remotely, which then led him to traveling the world, exposing him to other cultures and identities. Eventually, he realized that he could no longer deny that he did not believe in the core worldview that he was taught his entire life. In 2018, at 30 years old, he made one of the most difficult decisions of his life, to leave everything that he knew in pursuit of living a life that felt true to him. In that single decision, almost all of his social connections became estranged overnight. Today, he is living in his new home in New York City, which we're in right now, and he is the host of the podcast Cultured Boy. His core mission is to empower others to think for themselves and live a life that is authentic to them. As we've done with every episode, before we dive into this very juicy conversation, we are going to just do a quick little drop-in. Calvin, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, everybody. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I invite you to close down your eyes if that's safe. I always like to put a hand on my heart and one on my belly. And just start tuning in to where you're at right now. Maybe do a little body scan, noticing from head to toe where you might be holding some tension, any stress. Just notice it, don't judge it. We're going to take some nice deep breaths in through our nose and out through our mouth. And with the inhale, I want you to think of something that you're calling in, an intention for this next hour together. And with every exhale, I want you to really feel like you're letting go of something that no longer serves you. So nice deep breath in through the nose. And exhale through the mouth. Feel free to make some noise on those exhales. Nobody's judging you. Nice deep breath in through your nose. And out through the mouth. Final one. Make this one count. Nice deep breath in through your nose. And exhale through your mouth. Feel free to shake it out. Move around, do what you gotta do. How you feeling?
I feel great, yeah.
Right?
Especially after that. Yeah,
I
very
just-
good to just like get settled here. Especially in New York City.
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception that you can't feel grounded here. I believe you absolutely can.
100%. And if you can feel grounded in New York City, you could feel grounded anywhere.
Totally. Yeah. So, yeah, I feel good. I feel grounded. That was fun.
Well, welcome, Calvin. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you so much for offering your space. This is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome.
So obviously my podcast is all about taking aligned action towards your dream life. I mean, we're literally inside of your dream right now here in your studio apartment.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
That's
like
so true.
We're inside of your studio apartment, you know, in the Lower East Side that also doubles as a recording studio.
Yeah, studio in more ways than one.
You're here doing the fucking thing. You're so far away from what you were born into. But when I was meditating and thinking about what direction I wanted to go with this conversation, I really wanted to dive into the idea of being born and raised into a cult, but being born and raised in such a way that it almost feels like your dreams and your goals and your path was decided for you, which I feel like people even who weren't raised in cults probably can relate to a lot, right? Whether it's your parents, whether it's society, we talk about living your dream life, but some people don't even get to the point where they start dreaming because they just go down the path that was prescribed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you put it that way, because it's only been recently that it has felt that way, where I was like, quote unquote, destined. Like, Because there was a phrase that I would hear people say all the time that made me really annoyed, and it was that they were born for what they do. I didn't feel that way for most of my life, especially after leaving the cult. When I left the cult, I was so fucking mad at life and the universe and everything. I was like, what is this bullshit? Because if I looked at who I felt I was like, I got screwed. I shouldn't have been born in this. And if I wasn't, I would be so much further along on my dreams, my real dream.
Right.
And it's only been as I've taken unclear but steps toward what I think my soul and heart actually wants, like impossible things, like leaving the religion, starting out again on my own, living in New York City, where I'm now starting to realize, oh, this has been there all along.
Before you're able to step into your dream reality and to take that aligned action and this and that, it's like back it up, back it up, back it up. The first thing that you need to do in that process is have clarity. And you can't get that clarity until and unless you're connected to self.
Right.
And you can't be connected to yourself if you don't know how to be connected to yourself.
Right.
Like, I wasn't born and raised in a cult, but my circumstances presented as such that I became dissociated from my body. Until I was in my mid-20s, I had lived the majority of my life in a state of disconnection from self.
Totally. Same.
Yeah. I feel like when people talk about trauma or they talk about things that they've been through, it's like, oh, well, someone else had it worse, right? And it's like, you're such an extreme example of your circumstance being like crazy, quote unquote. I'm going to put quotes there because I honestly feel like your experience is probably extremely relatable to many people, just under a different guise.
I didn't think it would. I'm getting goosebumps as you say
wild?
That, because for the longest time I was like, nobody's going to relate to this.
Okay, so let's back up to, so you're born and raised in the cult. Around the time that you were 18, you decided to go to school.
I was like 20, 21, because one thing you have to know in my culture is it was not common to finish high school and go to college.
Okay.
In fact, nobody in my immediate family had ever gone to college.
Wow.
So
it's wild.
There was no
path for that. There was no example of this is what happens, this is what you do.
Yeah. And I was homeschooled, so the pathway was how people have, what do you want to be when you grow up? All of my family was in and around construction, manual labor. You had options. My options were like, do you want to be an electrician or a plumber or a framer or a cement mixer? Like, what kind of construction do you want to be in?
All right, so let's go to, you are now 21.
21, yeah. When I go to college?
Yeah.
The question that you had asked me, how did you know that you were in a cult? What was the starting point?
How did you find out? Who told you?
Nobody told me, and in fact, you can't be told. The last person on the planet to know that they're in a cult is the cult member.
Right.
And so I convinced my dad and grandfather to let me go to college. I went to study business, but part of going to any degree, you have to take general education.
Right.
And I had to take a philosophy class. And there was a single philosophy class, a single day, where I learned about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And this day I thought it was just a fun story.
Yeah.
And so the quick version of the story is, my professor sets it up that there are these people inside of a cave and they're chained. And she poses the question, are they sad? I'm like, well, of course they're sad. Why are they sad? Well, because they're in a cave and they're chained.
Right.
She's like, but they've been there their whole life. Well, that seems even worse.
Yeah.
She's like, no, you don't understand. What other frame of reference do they have? They have nothing to compare to. I'm like, oh, interesting. She's like, so of course they're not sad. They don't know any better. And how the story goes is, one part of the day, there are these shadows that appear on the wall. And the shadows are their ultimate reality. Like they discuss what they're seeing with each other. They argue about what the different shapes mean. Like, it's their most exciting part of the day.
Right.
Then the shadows leave. One day, in this old 2000 whatever Plato story, one of the people breaks loose from the chains. And when he breaks loose from the chains, he remembers that there's a back wall that would always kind of glow whenever the shadows would appear. He sees the shadows appearing, so he then goes and looks behind the back wall. What blows his mind, in a way, because he sees that these shadows were actually being created by someone holding up shapes in front of a flame. Now, if you can go back to my professor's point, like, they had no other frame of reference.
Right.
The shadows were ultimate reality, and then they see this is where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
His whole worldview was like crumbling.
Mind blown.
And then he sees a crack in the wall, and he goes out and he leaves the cave.
So before we get over to that,
Yeah.
when you said that, my brain immediately went to my experience the first time I worked with psychedelics, because I felt the same sort of mind-blowing perspective shift of just like, wait, what if my ultimate reality isn't the ultimate reality? What if your reality is different than your reality? And like the concept of perception just like blasted open. When you said that the first time, that was like the first thing that my brain went to, and I was like, oh shit, that's like it's the veil. It's you're literally peeling back the veil, and you're seeing
like, you don't realize how much of what you think is real is curated and boxed in. But where it really shows up for this guy in the story is he goes out and he sees a crack in the wall and he leaves the cave. So if you can imagine what he might have felt if he went from the shadow of a tree to somebody holding up a shape of a tree, well, then he sees a real fucking tree.
And he's like, what the fuck?
So his mind was really blown at that point, and at first it terrified him.
Yeah.
Why? Because if you're breaking down your whole worldview, that's terrifying.
Your entire concept of what you believe to be true is completely shattered, which is
what else do I believe that's bullshit?
Well, this is why also so many people are scared of psychedelics, and this is why so many people don't want to hear opposing views.
Understandably.
Because they're like, they don't want that crack.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I totally empathize with that.
Yeah.
So after it terrified him, he starts exploring the world and realizes, oh my gosh, there's so much more to life than I knew. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And he explores, has a good time, but then he realizes, wait, I still have friends and family down in the cave.
Right.
They need to know about this.
Right.
They need to know about expansion. They need to know about mushrooms and psychedelics.
Yeah, I gotta tell them.
So he goes down to spread the good word, and he stumbles a little bit because his eyes had been adjusted to the new light.
So he's now back in the cave.
He's now back in the cave, and they think he's gone blind. He's like, no, I'm good. They're like, where have you been? He's like, well, let me tell you, there's this whole world out there. And, of course, they have no frame of reference.
Totally.
So what do they think? He's gone crazy. And he's trying to explain it's not getting any better. And he's trying to say, no, this is why it's so great. And finally, in frustration, somebody says, but what could be better than the shadows that we have?
Yeah.
They ask him. And he's like, no, you don't understand. What I'm trying to say, the shadows are literally nothing.
Right.
The shadows are nothing compared to what is really real and what's out there. And when he said that, somebody said, wait, is he trying to take away our shadows? They felt threatened.
Yep.
And because they felt threatened, they killed him.
What a timely story.
Anthony Padilla said this to me when I was on his show, and he's like, the shelf life of that story. Yeah, that's wild. And there are some rumors that Plato and others had access to psychedelics. So, I mean, that's wild that story is still relevant. Even in hearing that story, it wasn't enough. Like, it didn't change anything for materially yet. It wasn't until the questions my professor asked after.
But when you heard that story initially, was your brain right away being like, oh, I'm the guy that left the cave?
I just thought it was a fun story.
You weren't like making connections? Because my brain immediately, when you started telling that story, I was trying to place who I was in the story.
Well, that's exactly what my professor asked. As soon as she told us the story, the way I would watch movies and stuff like that is it was just entertainment. So this was just an entertaining story.
Okay.
But then she asked, okay, who are you in this story?
Okay.
And when she asked that question, I started to think about it. And growing up Fundamentalist Mormon, one of the things that we prided ourselves on is wanting truth no matter what. In fact, we were a break off from the regular Mormon church because we felt that the regular Mormon church went away from truth and veered off from what the original founder prophet said, and so we were carrying on the truth even if it wasn't popular. And so when she said that, she then asked, are you somebody that loves truth? I'm like, well yeah. And it's the reason I went to college. I wanted to learn more. Yeah. And she's like, are you willing to leave everything you've ever known in pursuit of truth?
Yeah.
If that's what it meant. And then she kept going. She was like, everybody thinks they want to know truth.
Yeah.
You might even think you're studying truth. You might think, oh yeah, I want truth. I study it all the time. What if you think you're studying truth, but what if what you're really doing is just studying the shadows on the wall?
Mm-hmm.
And it was that final question. I don't know why it did it, but it was that question where I then reflected on everything.
Yeah.
That was a core thing that I knew to be true, like my worldview, God, and everything. And I realized, oh shit, there wasn't a single thing that was a core belief that I had internally discovered.
Yeah.
Everything. She was like, what if it's just somebody else's projections?
Yeah.
And you're looking at their shadows from those projections. Like,
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, everything that I know to be true is from my dad, the church.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, you need to look at this. I thought even when I was studying, no, I've read so many books, except what books was I reading? Books that I was given.
Yeah.
Saying, read this. That terrified me.
I feel like so many people could probably relate to that.
Oh, yeah.
I saw something where it was talking about opinions, and it was like, if somebody asks you what your opinion is and you can't explain why it's your opinion,
Yeah.
then it's not your opinion. And I truly believe this is why politics is such a sore subject, religion is such a sore subject, because people are like, well, this is it.
Yeah.
And then if you really start to dig back and you try to have an intelligent conversation with most people, they don't have good reasons, and then they feel threatened, and then they get mad, and then that becomes a very challenging conversation.
I think this experience for me is why I really don't care what somebody's conclusion is and what they believe. What I'm so curious about is, how did you come to this?
Right,
Like,
the why.
What was the, like, how did you? Like, was it because you hate this group and then you're listening to this data on either side?
Right.
I'm politically homeless, so I don't identify either side. I'm so curious to know what was your thinking? How did you come to this? What was your pathway? But yeah, anyway, that story didn't make me leave the religion, as you know.
Which I totally thought it would. When you first told me the story, I was like, cool. So then you heard this story and you were like, bye, like, I'm out.
No. Like, that's the thing. Like, that created what I call the crack.
Yeah.
Because you got to start there. You can't, and I even think, this is actually interesting that you say that, because I think that people thinking that, oh, you doing that automatically means you're going to leave the cult, is also could be pointed to the fact that you think, oh, I'm in the real world. Like, I'm in the one true world.
Yeah.
But we all have a cave.
Yeah.
We all do. Like, no matter where you are, we all have something that, because we kind of need to.
Right.
You have to be deliberate to go and self-explore and not just accept everything that's around you. But we're all doing it on some level.
We're obviously the people that leave the cave, right? We're the people that are going on this exploratory journey to find our purpose and to figure things out and to learn and do all of these things. I don't believe that everybody's supposed to leave the cave. I think that if everybody left the cave, society would crumble. The cave isn't bad, to your point. It's not like the outside world is good and the cave is bad, or vice versa. It's the cave is safe.
Yeah.
And I feel like you need some people that leave the cave. What that story brought up for me and what it made me think about is like what my purpose is and what I'm trying to build and do with supporting people in taking aligned action towards their dream life, but more importantly, learning how to connect deeper to yourself.
Yes.
And I feel like through my journeys, through psychedelics, through travel, through experiences, through quitting my job, leaving my apartment, going down the untraditional path, doing the scary thing, I don't preach that to everyone. I don't think that's everyone's path, but here are all the lessons and the things that I've learned, and I'm like, let's go back to the cave and share it in a way that's not going to get us killed, and not in a way that's my truth is the ultimate truth. Just in a way of like, here's what I saw, here's what I experienced, here's what I've learned. If it resonates with you, amazing. And if not, all good.
Yeah.
But you brought up something really beautiful about like perspective in that sense, where it's like, if you were to go back to the cave and be like, yo, this world is so much better, you better come with me. You said something about that being really presumptuous, right?
Yeah, and also, I don't know if it's helpful, because even if you could get through to someone, it would be so psychologically and emotionally painful.
Right.
Like, there's a reason that we can't and don't just hear the other side of a thing if we're not ready. Like, there's this quote, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah.
You can't just say, no, look, here's the truth. Because
it's my truth.
Yeah.
It's not the truth.
We're all, yeah, everybody, it's so interesting. Human beings they have a very real experience that is theirs. I don't know if they realize it's theirs.
Your external reality is a reflection of your internal perception.
Yeah, but I think people need to honor more of what they're actually experiencing and recognize it as that. That it's their experience. And then recognize how the circles you're in externally are going to influence the views that you're...
Well, if you really go back to that, it's like, no matter what, your entire perception of reality is influenced by everything that you've experienced in life. We have such a responsibility as creators to share as much as humanly possible, but on the same like side, all of these children now that are growing up have so much more access than we had to every type of story, every type of experience. Like, it's so wild to think how much that can shift and change an entire generation's perspective and perception of what reality is, could, and should be.
Yeah, you just made me think of something that I feel like I have a responsibility to point out, and that is even for the consumer.
Yeah.
Like, I think we need to talk more about that you have a responsibility of curating what you consume.
Yes,
Curating
yes,
your
yes,
own
yes.
feed. Like,
yes,
people
yes.
are choosing to listen to this podcast and that sort of thing, and sometimes we do it because of what pops up in the feed or because of what sounds good and true, but sometimes you need to be a little bit more intentional and be like, well, what kind of content do I want?
Yeah.
Because of who I am, who I authentically want to show up as, and you can then go seek that out, because to your point, there's unlimited options right now.
Well, and even the whole idea of people that are like, let's go back to politics, right? If you voted for this person that I don't agree with, you're blocked, deleted, and erased.
Yeah.
And yes, to a certain degree, if somebody's spewing hate, if somebody, if somebody's really like their stuff comes up on your feed and it is triggering you in a way that's making you feel like bad, fine. But if it's challenging you, and you still don't agree with it, like, I think as a generation, we need to do a better job of having the capacity to hear opposing opinions without the person who's sharing it needing you to agree. It's like, I'm not sharing this so that you see the light with me. I'm just sharing it, and do with it what you will, and then vice versa on the other side, and openness and a willingness to hear and just to be... like, when people talk to me and they give me opposing opinions, I'm always of the mindset of like, prove me wrong. I'm open to having my mind shifted. Give me new information.
If I can give something in that as well, because I think this does go both sides, and it definitely goes to both sides being open. There's this other thing, though, about... There's something to be said about making someone feel safe around you to have an opposing view. Yeah. Because there's a reason sometimes when people feel like that they have to retreat. Yeah. This is what happened with my religion when I was born. Like, we could have a whole other episode on what creates a cult. What's the anatomy of a cult? Because there's a perspective that mainstream has. I have a very different one, having grown up in it and studied them. And one of the things that is not talked about is the broader culture. Because the broader culture is a key ingredient to cultiness. Because if you feel like that you can't fit and you feel shunned, you retreat and you create cultiness. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. You need to be open to other perspectives. And especially when you have the upper hand, like maybe your political party won, maybe you are you're the voice that's the loudest right now. Right. There's something to be said about, hey, I feel very strongly about what I believe. However, it is very important to me that you, in this space, feel safe to share something that is completely different from what I believe. Right. And I just say that because I think those of us as creators and speakers and putting things out there, we have a responsibility, yes, to be open-minded, but we also, I think, if we're going to be in the space, we need to have the responsibility of decency and like giving people the freedom to have a viewpoint that's very different than ours.
Yeah, 100%. Like, could not agree more. So I want to loop back to so you had this crack, you had this thing, and we're tying it back to the feeling of connectedness.
Yeah, and disassociation.
Yeah.
Because one thing I told you when we talked about this, when you're like, wait, you didn't, what would you do then if you didn't leave?
Yeah.
I thought my church was still true. I just didn't know for sure. And that was shaky ground. So I was like, okay, if I really believe truth, then I have nothing to worry about. Because if it's true, I'm just going to study and I'm going to find that it's true. And then I'll have fun more.
What was it exactly? Like, was there like one fundamental like teaching that was like
that broke it down?
No. That was like the ultimate truth for your religion. Like, what was the what was the POV that you were trying to preserve or prove that was correct? That just the whole way of life.
Well, the number one thing, if you want to break it down to one thing, we were the one church left that had God's true authority. We were taught that you can't just be a church, you have to be a church that also speaks for God. You can't speak for God unless He said you have the authority to speak for me. And so control and authority is very big in my culture, because this is how different Mormon sects, because there's so many different breakoffs of Mormonism.
Yeah.
But what distinguishes one Mormon group from another Mormon group? It's that fundamental question. Which of us is truly the one in authority to speak for God?
Got it.
And they have different arguments of how they got the authority. The one that I was brought up with was they had to, from Jesus till now, had physical hands laid on their head to be granted this special Harry Potter-like power called the priesthood power, the priesthood authority.
Okay.
And why is that important to be connected to? Because if you're connected to that, that is your ticket to heaven. If you're disconnected from that, then you're not going to get to heaven. We could do 5 hours on the psychology of all this. Okay. To go back to what this whole disassociation thing, as I studied and recognized that there were different Mormon churches and I had some very uncomfortable discoveries, like different Mormon churches had different explanations of why they had the authority. And if I was being intellectually honest with myself, they seemed like good arguments. At least just as good as each other.
You didn't start the journey of discovery until that crack.
Yeah, because the only thing I studied up to that point was just how right we were.
Okay. So now you're not seeking to disprove, you're seeking to prove.
Yes, but from an internal perspective, like if I was on neutral footing, how do I come to this truth? And so I'm taking in different perspectives, least different perspectives around Mormonism. I did eventually go to different perspectives of Christianity, different faiths, and just humanity at large. But I just started really small, and then again, just the entire time, the only check was like if I was being honest with myself. Like am I just confirming my bias? Or am I actually saying, like, if I was on neutral footing, this is why I choose this over that?
Okay.
But one thing I discovered in all this is I was prioritizing external versus internal. I found a fundamental belief that I now think is one of the most toxic parts of fundamentalist Mormonism.
What is it?
This belief that truth is an external thing. That truth can only be discovered from an external source. In fact, we were taught that if one of the church leaders or the book that they told you to read was different from what you felt, you're fundamentally broken.
So it was essentially teaching you not to be able to tune into your intuition.
That's what happened. I'm getting goosebumps. dude, yeah, I discovered that. I was like, oh shit.
It's like teaching you that your intuition is wrong.
Yes.
What the fuck?
Yes. Yes. Dude, and I had.
Yeah.
And I noticed how I had.
Yeah. How, like, you felt the internal pang and you're like, that's bad, that's wrong, that's not true.
I wasn't safe in my own thoughts.
Yeah, But can I just say, I do feel like people, not in cults, that's how children are made to feel. When children fall down and they say, oh, no, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. We're being taught from such a young age to discredit our own intuition.
Right. And a whole other episode could be cultiness within culture, too, because like the one thing since I've left, I mean, there's a lot of it. I've come to the belief that to be culty is to be human. Like there's so many elements of it that create it. But that was the scary realization I had, was like, wait, am I slowly, because it happened subtly. It happened subtle as fuck. But slowly I began to discredit to where I'm like, I could give so many examples. What I will do is give kind of the PG-13 version of an example of what was accepted that in most cases would not ever be accepted. Seeing somebody be abused physically by someone in authority, doing nothing about it.
And your intuition is telling you that's bad, that's wrong, that's not good. And your society's telling you, no, that's
your
fine.
society is saying, no, I must be missing something.
Do you take psychology in any of your in your prereqs? It was an experiment that was about authority, where it was essentially, and I might butcher it, so sorry if you guys know this one, but you'll get the gist of it.
The shock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The shock.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, it was an experiment that was being done on authority figures. They had a group of people that signed up to do an experiment, and they were essentially in a room looking at somebody who was sitting in a chair, and they were being told that if they pressed this button, it was going to shock the person in that room, and they had the ability to up the intensity of the shock or lower it. And then they were testing if somebody came into the room specifically wearing a white lab coat, and they were instructing this person to up the intensity while this person is watching the person on the inside in physical pain, literally like, please stop, but the person in authority is saying, keep going.
This is part of the, you're supposed to do this, keep it going.
Yeah, they're more inclined, and then I think they did different versions of it where the person wasn't in a white lab coat and they were more inclined to question. But it was essentially saying that if somebody in an authority figure is telling you to do something that is against your intuition, we are trained. We're trained from a young age to just blindly listen no matter what. It resonated with me so deeply, specifically because intuitively as a child was the opposite, where I did not blindly accept authority and I questioned it, and I got in trouble all the time.
Of course.
I was a problem. Teachers were upset with me. I got in trouble in Hebrew school. I got in trouble all the time because I always asked why. And I was a smart kid. Like, if you gave me a real good reason, I would be like, okay. But I didn't just blindly accept it, and I was labeled as problematic because of that. And it's just funny because that's not a problem. The parents that hit their kid or get mad at their child and then say, because I said so, you're not teaching your child anything.
I'm curious your thought on this. Do you think that that's not problematic now in today's society? Do you feel like you could go in any circle in America and start asking questions?
No.
Okay.
No, not at
Me
all.
either.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But particularly, I think children are disempowered, and it's interesting to hear the extreme example of it with your upbringing, where it's like, and again, I can imagine you coming out of that being like, nobody can relate to this, and it's like, a lot of people can fucking relate to that.
It's one of the most human stories ever now that I've gone through it. Like, there's something universal to all of it.
So what did that do to you when you were a child, seeing something like that and being told that was like,
well, the bigger
normal
part,
or okay?
The bigger part was when I left. So when I got to the point, this actually full circles back to the whole disassociation comment. Because what was the decision of leaving? This is what the decision of leaving actually was. It wasn't just that I'm in a cult. I actually didn't think it was at that time.
Still didn't think it was a cult?
I didn't call it a cult until months after being out of it. That wasn't it. As I had traveled the world, as I had studied, as I had talked to different people, I started to realize there are so many different viewpoints on the same question, right? And so at first I was saying, well, which one is true? Which one is true? These guys think that, these guys think that. And then I asked something that I hadn't asked at all. Well, what do I think?
And why?
And why? And when I was asking that question felt wrong at the time to ask. Because who am I? Who am I to say that my version of reality is any more true than the authorities that are telling me what is reality, like those that I love, who I respect, like my dad, like my grandfather, and the other church leaders, and everything else like that. It felt so egotistical. But what I realized was, but it's what I have is that perspective. And as I started to explore other cultures too, I started to realize I'm getting closer to things that I was taught about. So even the teaching, even if it was well-meaning, I'm now closer to it. And now I'm having a real experience around it. Like, I'm not going to get into some of these details with, like there was some very harmful beliefs that I was told around race. But then I started to hang out with different races. And so now I have a mismatch between the belief that I was taught, but my own lived experience. And the thing I started to do in this moment was like, which one am I going to prioritize? Am I going to prioritize what I was taught? Or can I prioritize my honest lived experience of it? And what it came down to is I was like, how am I going to live the rest of my life? Am I going to live my life externally inward, where this is the viewpoint, so I get myself to agree with it, or
to confirm it,
or am I going to live from the inside out? And that was a big question, because if I was wrong, I was going to hell forever, because the one thing I couldn't do is leave the religion. That was taught as like the worst thing we could do growing up, because we had the one true church. And in my church, God doesn't just judge you based on your actions, God judges you based on what you were blessed with. And there's no greater blessing than being born in the one true church with his one true authority. And so if you leave, it's a big middle finger. And especially for guys, we had a higher standard. So leaving, if I'm wrong, I am fucked. But I decided that day I was already living in a sort of hell by distrusting myself and continuing to distrust myself. As painful as that could be, I hated the argument with myself when I would hear this is what's supposed to be true, and then I compare it to my own lived reality and logic.
And there was so much dissonance.
Yes. And so I was like, okay, there's this concept in Mormonism called the shelf. The shelf is, if you hear something from the church or from the book that you're reading that doesn't fit quite right, don't reject it. Just put it on the shelf. Because eventually God's going to reveal it to you. Your understanding's not there yet. That's how it's explained. Your understanding's not there yet. Just put it on the shelf. I had a big shelf of a lot of things. And this day that I decided to leave, I realized, oh, I don't have to have a shelf anymore. I can live. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be wrong. But I don't have to go through mental gymnastics.
Yeah,
and if
to rationalize truth that you don't feel in alignment with. Damn, whoa.
And there's other elements to other angles to this too. Here's another example. We were taught that there's like the afterlife, and there's all these stories of pre-existence, and there's some things that I even like to fancy now. However, the thing I knew for sure is I was in this life. And I didn't want to squander this one, because this is the most true, the most real. And so I realized that I want to live this one life based on the way I want to live it. I want to die on my own sword, so to speak, that even if I'm wrong, I would rather be wrong living inside out with what my own internal reality is versus just the external world. And that was the beginning of the reconnecting.
Did you do any spiritual practices, or was there anything, because you're aware of like subconscious mind and like how that's formed and where that all comes from. So the subconscious mind, so I've talked about it before, but just essentially for people who don't know exactly how this works, so between the ages of 0 and 7 is when our subconscious is essentially not fully cemented, but basically, so your perspective, the way in which you see the world, your viewpoints, not even if you were raised in a cult, but just in general, what you've been told by your teachers, by your parents, by society, all of those thoughts, beliefs, and downloads that are brought to you at that time, that becomes your subconscious. We're on autopilot like 90% of the time in life. We're only making conscious decisions, here and there, until and unless you do the work to change your subconscious beliefs and you're actively looking to reprogram them, you're going to stay stuck. So that's why people are walking around like big babies. They have bad tempers, they have this, they have that. It's like, these are all the people that haven't done the subconscious work. I'm curious, because that's really intense work to reprogram your entire belief system.
Well, yeah, because that's really what it was, because it entered a whole deconstruction process. And I was like, well, once, I think I mentioned this, but right when I made that decision to leave, 2 weeks later, I was in Costa Rica on a 7-day ayahuasca retreat.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm just saying, like, I can't imagine doing all of that work. It sounds like a lot of it comes from knowledge, but, like, there's only so much your cognitive brain has the capacity, the ability to do for that rewiring process.
It's been a lot of different rewiring. One thing that I had already had for me, which I think was really useful, I mentioned this when we were hanging out, but journaling, I was always
I think I asked you that specifically. I was like, I asked you about journaling during the time in which you were questioning. Yeah. And
which I don't have a lot of my actual internal thoughts during that time. I was still journaling, but I have to kind of read between the lines of my journals.
Yeah, because you said that you were even censoring yourself just in case somebody was reading it. But I think the context that we missed, though, is that so while you were in college, while you were having these questions, you were allowed to go to college. You were still living at home. You weren't allowed to talk to people outside of the cult, and you were definitely not allowed to share this newfound questioning.
Oh, no. It just wouldn't have been smart to.
Yeah.
Because that's a good point.
Who would you have talked to?
Yeah, you were like, who did you talk to about this? It was instantaneously the most isolating experience of my life, because we were already taught our entire lives to not talk to the outside world about where we're from. I have great-grandparents on both sides that have spent time in jail because of their religious beliefs. And so we were very quiet about it. I had that my entire life long. We didn't want anybody in the outside world to know that we were even polygamist. If there was a car that was driving down the dead-end street, we would hide behind a bush so that they couldn't know that they were a bunch of kids at our property. So I couldn't talk to the outside world, and then I sure wasn't going to tell my dad or my siblings that I'm doubting this, because I wouldn't want to be shunned. Right. So it was a very individual journey.
Wow. So plant medicine played a role in this deconstruction of reprogramming.
Yeah, reprogramming and getting to the core.
What do you feel like specifically, going back to the cave thing? I don't think everybody in the world needs to sit with plant medicine, but I talk about it so much on this podcast because for me, it played such a big role in my spiritual evolution.
There's one main thing it did for me. And this will tie back to comments we've made already on this episode about how do you know what's yours? How do you know what is real? How do you know it was not conditioned just from society? What is something you can own?
Right.
And so when I left, a big main intention, and that's what I also liked about the psychedelic experience, was come at this with a true intention of something you want to learn. And the intention that I came with was, who am I outside of this? Like, who am I beyond this? Like, who am I outside of the parenting, teaching, outside of society? What is something that I can claim that is mine, that's always been there? If we just burn all the nonsense away, what's that thing? That was my intention. And so on psychedelics, on ayahuasca, you can get visuals. And I go into the medicine with that intention. And it starts working. And at first I was like watching the stars and it felt like I was going in the stars, but now all of a sudden I'm like, in my life, I'm seeing the past. It's real almost as me in this apartment.
Right.
I'm seeing myself as like a 18-year-old, 16-year-old,
Wow.
14-year-old, and then it keeps going backward. And I'm seeing me in these experiences, almost like, I don't know if you've ever watched the Scrooge, whatever it's called, where he goes visited by the three ghosts. It felt like that, and I'm like, this is so cool. But as I'm going back in time, all of a sudden, the clarity of my vision is clouded by something that at the time felt really icky and scary, and it was ants. So this is strange, but I had my vision, I'm watching it, but all of a sudden these ants are clogging my view, and I'm trying to look past them because I'm trying to see the vision, and I was like, what does this mean? Does this mean my brain is dirty? Does it mean I'm dirty? Do I have bugs crawling on me? I tried to resist them, and
what you can't do in medicine.
Exactly. You can't resist. And in fact,
you can't do that.
I tried, and after I tried and nothing worked, I remembered the instruction that the shaman gave.
Was it surrender?
Yeah. It was not only surrender. He gave surrender. He gave the surrender advice, and then he said this. He was like, you're going to come to a fork in the road, sometimes on the medicine. Mm-hmm. He's like, one path, you'll see rainbows and unicorns and pots of gold. The other path is your creepy neighbor. Most times in life, go down the rainbow path. On ayahuasca,
go to the creepy neighbor. Check it out. See what's up.
Like, because this is where you're safe. There's more to go. There's way more than everything down the other path. Go to the creepy neighbor. Mm-hmm. But I remembered that. And so I then tried to accept the ants as though I was choosing them. So not just surrendering to them, being like, okay, how come I be curious about this? Right. And something interesting happened. When I accepted them, all of a sudden, the view of them starts zooming out from my periphery. Mm-hmm. And then they're on the ground, and they're leading me somewhere. And so it was kind of like this fun lesson of like, cool. We're just trying to get your attention. We're trying to take you where you want to go. We're showing you to go somewhere. Yeah. I'm like, ooh, so now I'm on this little adventure. I'm getting goosebumps related.
Following the ants.
I'm following the ants. They were like trying to get my attention so that they could lead me somewhere. So I accept them. I'm following these ants. Craziest cool experience. I then start recognizing the ground where they're leading me to. Okay. Because it's from my childhood. Whoa. When I was really young, when I was 13, we built an addition, which took up most of the yard.
An addition to the house?
The house. We had to...
Because you had 44 siblings in one house?
Yeah, so we had to go from like 3 bedrooms to 12. I'm now back to that old ground before the addition.
Wow, I have chills.
And it's quiet outside. I see the apple trees that we had ripped out. I see the crack in the sidewalk. And then the ants go into this pile of ants. Mm-hmm. And right there by the side of the pile of ants is a little boy on his belly, hands on the cheeks looking at the ants. And that was me. And I remember that day.
Does that really happen?
It really happened.
Wow. I
remember that day. Everybody was in the house on a summer day, doing whatever they're doing, maybe watching a cartoon, and I didn't like sitting still. I liked exploring and learning things, and the lesson I got, the message I got on ayahuasca that day was like, this is you. Nobody made you do this. This is you in your natural state.
And that was your intention, to get clarity on what that was.
Yeah, what is something that I can take? What's me? You're naturally curious. This is you.
Yeah.
And so that has been such a helpful anchor of like, I don't have to be ashamed
Yeah.
of that. Like, that's me.
Yeah.
And I want to keep that. I want to protect that.
It always goes back to childhood. Like, it always goes back if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling like, I don't know which direction to go. It's like, what lit you up and brought you joy when you were a kid?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't need to be the exact same thing, right? That doesn't mean, like, I think some people try to take it really literally, where it's like, okay, you're gonna go back, sit outside and look at ants again. It's like, no, like, the journey that you're on is going outside and looking at the ants. Like,
The journey I'm on,
that's what you're doing.
The journey I'm on is curiosity.
Yeah.
That's, if I have a religion now, it's that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm curious about life. I'm curious about why we're here. I'm curious about hyperactive topics that people don't get close to. Like I was just telling you before we recorded where I'm going next month. I'm curious about conflict. I'm curious about when things are obviously not going well for people, where's the solution?
Right.
I'm curious about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Like, I'm curious about that. And again, that was just helpful to return to that and to let it out. And it, in a way, I feel like that's my life now. My life now is like, I'm being a parent to that version of me. And I'm cultivating my life in such a way where the raw human curiosity of whatever that is, I want that to lead. And I want to cultivate and craft my life where it can lead. Because I think that's the most indivisible thing. It can't be broken down more than that. It's like there's so many stories and belief systems we can all create, but that something like curiosity is such a potent thing that I think has the ability to be a force for good in the world.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
curiosity, one of the quotes that always has bothered me my whole life, especially since I've left, is curiosity killed the cat. I want to make a story about it almost, that, like, and reinvent a story that, like, every cat, like every animal, only had one life.
Right.
Well, how do you think they got to the 9? Curiosity is magic. It somehow got him to 9.
Yeah.
And then somebody yelled, like, hey, how did the cat get 9 lives? And somebody far away yelled, curiosity! Curiosity cured the cat. He's like, what did he say?
Cured the cat. I killed the cat.
Exactly.
It was somebody heard it wrong.
And somebody overheard it. It's curiosity cured the cat. And so...
Oh, I love that. All right, that's the next children's book.
Yeah, exactly. Curiosity cured the cat. Curiosity cures the divide. I really do. I really believe that.
Well, there's 2 more points that I want to hit on. I want to go back to the moment that you actually did leave. I feel like we closed the loop now on getting clear on connecting back to self. I knew there was some plant medicine in there, or some sort of a spiritual practice. So we had journaling, we got plant medicine.
We didn't talk about that. We didn't get that.
We didn't, but I'm just thinking about it, and I'm like, I know
there has to be.
There has to be, because you can't intellectually talk yourself out of a core belief. Like there has to be, whether it's meditation, whether it's journaling, whether it's plant medicine, whether it's like
it's something real.
I want to hear about the moment in which you actually decided to leave, and then I want to hear about what you've done since and what you've built, and the fucking books on your bookshelf, and what you're stepping into next. Because I think just to take it all the way through, and again tying it back to this podcast of like, you were born and raised with these beliefs, with this understanding of the way that the world was. You had your curiosity, you questioned it, you left, you explored, and then now you're on the aligned action portion of it.
Well, strangely, I think I have been the whole time, and I didn't realize it.
Okay.
I think it's just about, it's not yes or no or black or white, it's like how much. How much are you on the aligned path? Because I think it was an aligned path for me to be curious enough to know that I wanted to keep learning, which led to me asking my dad and grandfather if I could go to college and that sort of thing. But you're right, in some ways, to your point, I feel like I'm just turning the page on a new chapter. And because this is the first time I've been as free as I am now, living in my own space with myself and developing core friendships here in New York City of people that I feel incredibly safe around, people that don't think the exact same way as me but accept me anyway, and and I accept them in their belief system, which I think is so big, because so much of American society, especially right now, people don't ask who are you as a person, they ask what side are you on. And I am so grateful for the small group of 5-6 friends that I feel like I can be safe with. And so the journey since, I mean, when I left, that was also just the beginning of a thing, because leaving was not, the decision was hard.
And it wasn't that long ago.
It was 7 years ago.
Yeah, like
7
it's
years
not
ago.
that long. Like you lived your entire life. Like
7 years ago.
I just turned 30 1 month ago.
Yeah.
You literally were in a cult my whole life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
My whole life.
Right.
You were inside of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and at first I felt bad about it. Back to this whole thing of like, my whole youth was wasted, but then I noticed like my friends will, they point out, and I feel it too, where they're like, dude, it's so fun watching you because you're seeing things with fresh eyes. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Like,
yeah, everything's exciting
yeah,
too.
like things that are boring to a lot of people I think are cool. Like the example I always give is flying. It's crazy. Like flying.
Like in a plane?
Yeah. Because if we just zoom out for a fucking second, we take things for granted so quickly as humans. We're so fast to take something for granted. Whatever we start having, it just becomes our normal. We forget that we're animals like other animals. And once upon a time, our animal, who were our ancestors, looked up in the sky and saw birds and said, we want to do that. Now we do it infinitely better than the birds.
Yeah.
And we travel distances
Around the world.
I see people getting upset that their plane's delayed 30 minutes. Oh, I'm going to be late 30 minutes. I'm like, you have to wait 30 minutes to do the impossible? Come on. Like it's my reset. Speaking of these practices that reset me, flying is that reset because I do it a lot now.
You're like, this is magic.
Every time I'm looking out at the sky, we're above the clouds, I'm like, we are hairless apes. And I'm flying right now. We like that's nuts.
That's
like
amazing.
it's actually crazy.
It's amazing.
If you really think about it. Like, so I don't know where I was going with that. Except what I'm stepping into now, because there was a long period right after leaving, just getting okay.
Yeah.
Getting okay with, again, a whole other episode, which we're not going to get into the details of, severing all the social ties and feeling okay with all those social ties being severed. Questioning leaving that whole period, like, did I do the right thing? Getting okay there.
And I think also something that shocked me as well is like after college, again, like you had the crack, but you still went back afterwards.
Well, I had never left.
You were still living at home, but I mean, it wasn't like you went to college and then you went off and started your life. You were in college, you stayed in the cult, you got married.
I had a church arranged marriage, yeah.
Yeah, you had
Which
children.
I have 2 kids from that church assigned marriage.
Yeah.
When I decided to leave, that was a big question mark for us, and she realized, no, I don't want this journey. I see where you're going, and it's not where I want to go. Like, it seems too big and too scary.
Did you even share with her at the beginning? Like, did she know?
She knew.
She knew that you were questioning.
Oh, yeah. She was the one person
that you were able
that
to
I
tell.
was able to tell. Because by the time we got together, she was way more cultured than I was. She was way more open-minded than I was. The way my family was raised and her family was raised, she had a dad that was a doctor that had gone to college. She had siblings that had gone to college. That was way more.
So your family was way more strict than hers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And she went to not a public school, but like a community school. So she heard different perspectives. I was homeschooled. She had a variety of ideas throughout most of her life. By the time I went to college when I was 20, 99% of the people that I knew personally had the last name Wayman. That's my last name.
99%.
That's my last name.
So you didn't. How many people had you met outside? Like, what's an example of someone
1%.
that you, like who, like a doctor?
Other people in the community that lived 4 hours away. I knew of them, just not close. My point is, do you see like how closed in this is?
Yeah.
And like that's where I got my perspectives, was from other grandfather, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins.
Could you even like talk to your siblings about it? Do you have like a best friend sibling?
In my upbringing, your best friends were your cousins, at least in my family. So the person you told secrets to, siblings weren't always safe. siblings were like, this is what was interesting about having a homeschool dynamic. Sometimes you trusted your siblings, but sometimes they backstabbed you. And it was like the sibling rivalry thing in a real way. And so I didn't have a lot of trust with some of my siblings. The people that I trusted the most were cousins. Like I had a best friend that he and I were the exact same age, and we would question things together.
Yeah.
Like I remember one time when I had my driver's license, he worked at this lawnmower repair shop, and I would go pick him up. He didn't have a car. I would pick him up from work and drive him back home.
Did you go to the DMV to get your driver's license? Like I have so many questions about like logistics.
I still do all those things, but here's one thing that's a funny story for me to reflect on 20 years later is I remember picking him up. We would sometimes, I'd go early and get a pizza from Little Caesars Pizza and go to a park, and we would eat it in the truck. And this was considered being a rebellious act.
Because you went to a restaurant?
Well, yeah, and we were just hanging out, a very frivolous activity instead of just picking him up and going home. And I remember at that time asking, like, do you think this is normal? That we have to sneak to hang out? Like, do you think other kids do this? I remember asking that.
Are you eating a pizza in this truck?
Yeah. That I picked him up early. We went and got a pizza, and we were in the truck eating pizza, hanging out. And I remember we're just like, that's just the philosophical line in the breeze. Like, do you think this is normal? Do you think other kids have to sneak to hang out?
And what was the conversation? Was he like?
He's like, no. He's like, because he was actually more rebellious than me too. He was so rebellious, in fact, that he would.
And it depends how strict your parents were. Like I guess there are some people that were raised with very strict parents that would have been like, you can't do that.
Yeah. But most kids go to school and have friends and stuff like that.
Right.
And at that point, we hadn't. We had both been homeschooled separately in our own houses.
Right.
And so he was like, no, there's no way. He's like, everybody like goes to school and hangs out. I'm like, really? Like, there's a bunch of those little stories that I have where I'm like, another time when I was a little bit older, when I was 19, I hung out with some friends that were Fundamentalist Mormon, but in a different church. I had a night job, and so now I was kind of disconnected from my parents a little. And so I went and hung out with them on like a Halloween night. I told my parents that I was going to hang out with them, and they're like, okay, you need to be home by 10:30 or whatever. But hanging out with them, I was hanging out with their dad in their house, and the dad said, okay guys, I'm gonna go to bed, I'll see you guys in the morning. And I remember being like, he's not gonna wait and make sure you come home? And I'm like, no. I was like, well, what if you stay out till like 11? It's like, doesn't matter. And I was like, we're probably gonna stay out till 1 or 2. And I'm like, what? And he's not gonna care? It's like, he's gonna be asleep. So the way I grew up is like, if you were ever out.
Yeah, your parents are sitting there waiting.
Yeah, they're waiting.
Yeah.
They're waiting for you. And they're like, where are you? Like, yeah.
I would like text my mom in high school and just be like, I'm coming home tomorrow. And she'd be like, okay.
But to try to get to your question of life since is, it's been a journey of like, once I got on my own, COVID starts, and it was really in COVID where I started to ask myself some very basic, big, honest questions. Questions like, where do I want to live?
Where were you at the time? Were you still in?
At the time, I was in Southern Utah.
Okay.
I'd gotten my first apartment. So,
I also feel like New York City is like the craziest place you could have moved to.
Yeah. Well, remember part of the story where I did a little bit of traveling? So one of the things I did is I was getting into social media, creating a social media online business. I came to New York for a social media conference. And I came just to go to the conference. And I thought I would hate it here.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a small town. Like when we grew up, when people are fantasizing about their future, they're saying, I can't wait, I want to get 40 acres somewhere, I want to have 12 cows and like a big garden.
Not a tiny little studio apartment on the Lower East Side.
Not at all. And so when I came to New York, I thought like they don't want to see any neighbors. Like we grew up, when I came here, I'll never forget taking the train into the city. Something lit up in me, and I was like, what is this? I just remember running around and exploring, and what I since know now, reflecting back, I didn't realize at the time, I had so much fun. I felt free, and I was connected to that curious little boy.
New York has always been that for me too, I'll say. I grew up in South Florida, and there was something every single time I came to New York, that feeling. I felt it every time, where it was just like, like this, like alive. And I think also just access, like the ability to take the train and have public transportation just take you anywhere in the city is so, and I
couldn't believe that I had access to this entire city through the subway system when I was here. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I don't even need a car? I can do this with $2.50?
And that's something that going back to like your amazement with planes, it's like, I think that's something that people who grew up here, that live here, that know nothing different, take for granted, of just like, that is amazing.
Yeah, because I grew up in a suburb of Salt Lake City, and if you were going to go somewhere, you needed to coordinate vehicles and stuff like that and get there, and it was a big event.
Yeah, it's a big
deal.
And
I remember being here and just being some part of New York and wanting to go somewhere, and I was like, I can just hop on the train and I go there and I'm there in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I mean, today's a perfect example.
Yeah.
This morning I wake up and I'm coordinating. I actually planned this last night, and I'm like, I'm 10 minutes away from the New York Stock Exchange. I'm just going to go there and see the bell ring. Yeah. So it's just, it's
and then pop back through the podcast episode. It's also what I did my like 20s in New York City. I did all of my summer internships. So every summer in college, I was here in the city. But that was right around when I first started drinking. And I remember it was amazing, because if you're anywhere else, it's like you need a designated driver, and you need to figure out like, where am I going and where am I, and I lived in LA for a while. It's like, where do I park and this and that. And I was like, in New York, it's like, we're gonna go out tonight, and it's like, we could start over here, we could end over here, we could go to this bar, that bar, and it's like, we don't need any designated driver, we don't need a plan. You have the ability to be way more free-flowing and like open to experience, or even like dating, for instance. Like dating in New York City versus dating in LA, it was like, in New York, it's like, oh cool, we could pop by this place. It's also
been a good place to catch up on my 20s.
Well, but it's also like, it's not that big of a deal. Like in LA, it's like, if you want to go on a date with someone and one person lives in Venice and the other person lives in Hollywood, it's also just a big commitment. You can't just say, hey, I only have time for a drink, I have a dinner later. It's like, no, I'm driving 45 minutes to come meet you. Like, this better be an all-night extravaganza.
We could do a whole episode on just how amazing New York is already and has been for me as a person. People have said, that's such a big change. How's it like? But the truth is, it is the easiest transition I've ever made in my life.
That's wild.
It is because the question was, when I was asking myself, where do I want to live? Where do I feel most myself?
Yeah.
I joke around with my friends that...
It's a great question.
I joke around with my friends that I moved to New York to get some peace and quiet. Because here's something that's not a joke. New York City is the first place I've ever been where I feel like I can truly relax.
But I also totally relate to it.
You get it,
I get it.
Especially given, because where does
get
relaxation come from? Well, relaxation it's an internal thing. It's a safety thing. It's I'm okay here. I belong here. You can't relax if you don't belong.
You know what it really is, if you really want to get down to the root of it, it's I feel safe in my body.
Yes.
And if you feel safe in your body, you can feel safe anywhere.
Yes. So when I realized that was such a crazy thought. I wish I could articulate how crazy it sounded, though, when I was like, wait, where do I want to live? If I'm being honest, I'm like, New York. I didn't have the money. I just posted something on Instagram yesterday where a lady's like, nobody can live in New York. 8 million people do. 8 million people live in New York. Not as many in Manhattan, but I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, this sounds impossible, but millions of people are doing it, so it must be possible. And so here's the other side of it too. I was thinking about, I remember when I was like, I knew I wanted to live in city. I liked that convenience, and I had the option of LA and New York because I lived in Southern California for a while, and I loved the weather. But when I really thought about it, I was like, what scares me a little more? And New York did.
I love the parallels of our stories so fucking much. I had a New York versus LA moment as well, where I was like really like deciding between, and I've done both, and I'm still at that stage where half my shit is
a whole other parallel was we were both in Thailand in 2017, and that was
insane. That was the catalyst of my entire spiritual awakening.
That was right before I'd left the religion. Catalyst for me as well. The Thailand experience is why I left.
Yep.
The end of that year.
Yeah. Well, so I did a different podcast episode where I was talking about New York versus LA, and that was honestly my decision as well, because for me, New York made sense. Like, New York was the obvious choice. New York was, I had friends there, I had family there, I had already done all my internships there, so I already had a career path there. And LA was like, I knew nothing about LA. I knew nothing about film and television. I had no friends there. I did have some extended family that I ended up getting close with while I was there, but I didn't really know them before I left. And I didn't realize it until I was on a podcast episode last year and they asked me this question and I tuned in and I was like, why did I choose LA? And I was like, because it felt harder.
Yeah.
And I wanted the harder path.
Yeah.
I didn't want the thing that felt easy.
I got one life. I want adventure.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. Amazing. Well,
and I wanted to, when I thought of the type of man I wanted to be and develop into, I was like, New York has the reputation for grittiness for a reason. When I projected myself and looked out into the future, I'm like, I like the kind of person I have to be to make it there.
Yep. Oh, fucking love that. I love that. Well, now we're in New York. What are you building? Like, what's the dream? What's the goal? What are you stepping into now?
Cultured Boy, the podcast, YouTube video podcast. Here's the honest truth. I don't know.
Yeah.
The honest truth right now is, here's what I know for sure. I want to lean into that part of me that is just curious. I really do feel that one of the things that is causing a lot of problems in America and in the world right now is a lack of childlike curiosity, as corny as that sounds.
I love it.
And I want to do something crazy like, this is also going to be a sentence nobody's ever heard. I want to take, if it's possible, I want to take childlike curiosity to the Middle East.
Wow.
And I want to explore. I want to understand. I want to share the journey, and somehow, some way, through content, is what it's looking like the path is going to be, develop community and audience to where I can do this full time. Yeah. And again, I'm a couple steps down this road, a little bit into monetization, but certainly not enough to pay for my New York City apartment. So the big thing coming up for this next year is I'm jumping in with both feet to try to see if I can make something that is sustainable with an audience and a community. And so right now it's the YouTube podcast Cultured Boy. I also know I want to do more writing, more articles, and just sharing perspectives. I dabble a little bit in comedy. We'll see if stand-up becomes more of a thing, but really just trying to get quiet and listen to what actually interests me and let that lead.
Fucking love that. If anybody could take anything away from that, like, damn. I feel really similarly too. I think that's why we connected so deeply. Right. I see this really big vision, but logistically I'm like, I don't fully know what is unfolding, but I'm following the breadcrumbs. I know that the podcast was part of it. I know that the content creation is a part of it. I know that I want to build community. My intention is really similar as well. I love that yours is all about like childlike wonder and curiosity. And mine's all about coming back to that connection to self and then living with intentionality and play. Having fun, play, like, yes, this spiritual journey is deep and introspective, but it also, like, it's not that fucking deep.
Yeah,
it's not that deep.
There has to be fun. That's something else that's been a big deal. This is something I'm leaning into, relearning, because it was so big and existential, my religion. It was like, you got to do this so you can get to heaven. If you don't, if you slip up, you're going to go to hell.
Everything was quite literally life or death.
Yes, and I'm like, I'm so done with that. I want to do something just because it's fucking fun. Yeah, it's not that deep. What sounds interesting to you, and go deep with it. Yeah. And so that's what I'm trying to do, even with this adventure of like, can I make a living being me? Like, I don't know, but I know I've got one life, and I know why not try. Yeah. If that sounds interesting. Yeah.
Worst case scenario, you go back to the 9-to-5 grind and you do what everyone's doing anyway. Yeah. So it's like,
I actually think it's even better than that. Worst case scenario, I'm gonna have an adventure, man.
Yeah. And also, I feel like you probably feel similarly. There is no backup plan. Like, it will work. Some iteration, some version of what you're creating has to work because you have rent to pay and you're going to figure it out. If 8 million people can't live in New York, but they do, they fucking figure it out.
I try to balance like practicality and dreaming, but just letting myself dream at that possibility just a little bit feels so good. The possibility of like content writing and actually a creative endeavor. Yeah. It's the most ridiculous thing I could ever dream up, especially coming from a manual labor past.
Right.
Like having something digital. Yeah. You goofing around. Yeah. That is interesting and fun for you being the thing.
Your story is so interesting. You being you just existing is inspiring to people, and it's opening people's minds and it's leading them down. Like, my hope and intention is that people listen to this episode and they're like, holy shit, I've never met someone from a cult before, and wow, I relate with all of these things, and wow, I've never thought of things that way.
The only thing I give a fuck about right now
is expressing.
Yeah. What is real? Yeah. What is real for me? Yeah. What is a real expression? What's a real thing I'm curious about? That's the experiment that I'm running. Yeah.
I like that you're viewing it as an experiment too. You're leading with curiosity. You're just playing.
Yeah.
And seeing what unfolds.
There's this really simple thinking tool, because you had mentioned clarity and how important that is to create the life that you want. And sometimes it can feel very daunting to whatever the dream is, to go from steps A to Z and like, how am I going to do it all? And you don't need to know all the steps. So the thing I say is, like, whenever you feel stuck, remember your ABZs. What do I mean by that? This is what I tell myself if I'm feeling stuck. Remember my ABZs. My Z is my highest excitement, as Sky might say. It's my thing I'm going after, the thing I want. That's my Z. When I was in the cult and I just left, my Z was New York. My A is where I am now. And B is just my next baby step. Because people try to, my brain did this, I tried to map out every step to the destination.
Can't.
You can't. And you ruin the adventure too.
Totally.
So where am I going? Yeah. Where am I now? What's my next baby step?
Yeah.
Baby girl, baby brother. If you do that, if you commit to that, magic happens.
Let magic unfold. It's allowing the space for magic to unfold.
Yes. And that little step is...
the next thing leads to the next thing leads to the next thing.
Yes. I don't know what's out there. I don't know if there's a God, but it feels like it's like that's how you communicate to everyone, to the world, to the universe. Yeah. This is where I want to go. Don't get lost in steps G, H, and I. Yeah. You're not at steps G, H, and I. Yeah. Where am I going? Where am I now? What's my next little baby step?
Yeah, and start before you're ready.
My last little story, and then I'll let you direct whatever you want to do, is like, so after I decided to move to New York, I didn't have enough money at the time to live here, obviously, but I had enough to visit. Yeah. And I started to visit to see where I wanted to live. Yeah. And I had really good advice from a friend that said, try on different neighborhoods, see what you like. Yeah. And it was Lower East Side, East Village, where I'm like, okay, this is my vibe. And I remember walking down the street, and what really anchored it in is I walked down the street, and there's this place down the street called Book Club. It's a coffee shop. It's like, I want that to be my morning place. The craziest part is, I mean, if you have listeners that believe in manifestation, this is a fun one, because I have mixed feelings about manifestation. However, when I came to New York for that year, 2022, wherever I stayed, I would put the address in my phone, so whenever I hit home, it would go to that address. Okay?
Oh, I like that.
And that just made it easy. If I get off, wherever I got off of, it would navigate me to home. While I was here, I just started to lean into the things I wanted to do. Like, right outside my window here is a basketball court. I was staying close to the Lower East Side, and I started playing basketball. And I met this kid named Anthony. And why did I hang out with Anthony? Because he also liked basketball, he also liked comedy, and I was into comedy. We went to comedy shows, we became best friends. He knew my pathway of I wanted to get to New York at some point, I wanted to live in this area. And he's like, oh, I live really close to the basketball court. And I was like, okay, cool. At one point, I was like, I'm running out of money. And he was like, yo, I'm going to LA for a little bit. You can stay in my apartment if you want. I was like, dope. Would you let me in? He's like, I said I'm going to pay me some money. But just pay me way less than it would be as a hotel to cover my rent. Because I have bills too in New York. New York City rent is crazy. And I was like, okay, deal. And so that was the last place I stayed before I ran completely out of money, was his apartment. Yeah. Okay? And I remember recording a video crying in his apartment because I was like, I don't know when I'm going to make it back here. I at least know that this is where my home is. And I went back home, and this was so fun for me because I set his address as home. And what was fun about that is every time I was traveling around Utah and hit home, it would go across America, basically saying, this is your home.
Wow.
And I started doing some things so I could afford to live there.
Yeah.
And I stayed connected to Anthony.
Yeah.
And we would like FaceTime once in a while, and he said, okay, dude, at some point, even if you're not making enough money, if you're not ready, you should start applying for apartments just to get familiar with it. I was like, okay. And I kept putting it off. He was like, no, you really should try it. It's a pain in the ass to get an apartment. He said, you have to pay application fees. I'm trying to save money. I was like, I don't want to pay money just to waste it. Fine, whatever. And then Anthony says, yo, I'm thinking we're going on a sabbatical for 3 months. I was like, okay. And he's like, okay, dude, I've been trying to get you to apply for an apartment. You're probably not going to get mine. It's too expensive. But you should still apply for mine. Because obviously you didn't have any income last year because I had just saved up money. But you should do it just to try. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. I apply for his apartment. It's this apartment.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
The apartment that I stayed, where I didn't know when I was going to come back.
Shut the fuck up.
Where I had set to home for 6 months.
That's where we are right now.
That's where we are. I have a video of me at his desk being like, when am I going to make it back to New York? And it's here.
What?
The takeaway in all of this. And this is to your point of you don't know how it's going to unfold.
Yeah.
All I'm doing...
Hold the vision. Hold the fucking vision.
Hold the vision and just lean in. Lean into... and let the magic unfold. I did what I could do. My baby step was to go to New York. My baby step was to do what was interesting to me, to play basketball and to meet a guy named Anthony. My baby step was to become friends with him, not with any ulterior motive, just because it felt good. The hardest thing to do for a lot of people is to find an apartment in New York. This was the easiest thing that has ever happened in my whole life.
Wow, because it was supposed to happen. My whole philosophy, and you can feel however you want about manifestation, but my whole message on this podcast, it's clarity, it's connection, it's holding the vision, but it's also taking that aligned action. And what you just shared, all of those little steps, all of those things that you did, that's not you just wishing and praying and sitting in your top, like, oh, I wish. It's like you have to do something. You have to put yourself out there. You have to post your first video. You have to take that trip, make it fucking happen. Show up.
And I think my point to add in that is like, yes, you got to do those things, but don't put so much pressure on yourself. I think you have to know all of the things and do all the steps. You got to be okay with it not happening in a strange way. The thing that has helped me also as a mindset is if you're looking about living authentically, authenticity and a true expression isn't about a destination. It's about an expression. It's about what you are genuinely intending wanting to go, right? And so the reminder for myself I always say have is, I'm okay with not getting the thing. Yeah. I'm not okay with not trying. With not pursuing what I authentically desire.
By you pursuing the path of the desire of New York and XYZ and just openness, that openness to allowing the magic to unfold can lead you to somewhere beyond what you could have imagined.
Case in point, the thing that was my highest pursuit in 2015 that started this whole episode is I want to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. That's what I thought I was truly after. Yeah. I didn't realize it was going to lead me on a journey of recognizing what I was born into. Yeah. Which developed me in a way I would have never thought, and it now kicked me off on a life journey that I would have never planned. Right. So, yeah. Sometimes that can be a scary thought because people are like, no, I really want the thing. It's like, hey, look, here's the good part.
No matter what, something amazing is going to happen.
If it's different, it's only way better. I wanted to be an entrepreneur and have all this money, which I've done some progress there, but the journey of discovering what I was in and now having the perspective that I have in the life that I'm on now, way different than I would have planned. Yeah. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Fuck yeah. Well, dude, this has been an amazing, amazing conversation. I'm so grateful that we met. I'm going to put all of Calvin's links in the bio. Link to Cultured Boy, so you guys can check out his podcast. If you haven't already done so, please like, rate, subscribe, all of the things. This was so much fun. Thank you.
I don't know if we can do a hug.
Can we do a hug? Yeah. Oh, this was so fun. Yay. See you guys on the next one. Bye.